الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن سار على سبيله إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. So today inshallah we'll continue our lesson in discussing the book At-Timithi fi Ulum al-Hadith by Ibn Malakin rahimahullah. So this, as we mentioned before, is a book that is somewhat a summary of Ilm al-Hadith that was put together by Ibn Malakin rahimahullah. And in the previous lesson that we have discussed discussed concerning the two categories of hadith, which is hadith al-Sahih, and what is involved in that discussion regarding hadith al-Sahih is definition, and also other related topic relating to hadith al-Sahih. Then also we discussed in the last lesson regarding what the author rahimahullah mentioned concerning hadith al-Hasan. Then he mentioned, so we discussed concerning hadith al-Hasan and also some matters that relates to that particular topic. Then today inshallah we'll continue with the discussion regarding aqsam al-hadith, where the author rahimahullah that he divided hadith into three categories. And as we mentioned, this is what has been established by the ulama of hadith of latter times regarding hadith being classed into three categories. As he mentioned, aqsamuhu thalatha. So this is what Ibn Malakin rahimahullah mentioned, aqsamuhu thalatha, that the categories of hadith, that there are three. Sahihun, the first being sahih, and we discussed that. Hasanun, and we discussed concerning hadith al-Hasan, and also he discussed da'if. Then he went on to explain each separately by giving a definition of each. And today inshallah he mentioned, we'll continue about where we stopped, by the author rahimahullah mentioned what da'if. So the next matter is regarding hadith da'if, where he mentioned the definition, laysa wahidan minhuma. Laysa ma laysa wahidan minhuma. So he mentioned concerning the definition of hadith da'if, ma laysa wahidan minhuma. It is not from of those two previously mentioned. So what he meant regarding ma laysa wahid, it is not from one of the two that were previously mentioned. So that is concerning hadith ad-da'if, as the author generally give us a general idea of what is said to be hadith ad-da'if. But the ulama of hadith, that they have a more specific, more detailed definition of hadith ad-da'if, and also discuss other matters that relates to that particular topic. So we kind of somewhat try to shed some more light regarding hadith ad-da'if. So after first of those things, we'll discuss concerning tarif hadith ad-da'if. We discuss concerning aqsam hadith ad-da'if, also the hukum of hadith ad-da'if, and other topics that relates to this particular subject regarding hadith ad-da'if. So as he mentioned, hadith ad-da'if, and as we said, that it is somewhat agreed upon between the ulama of hadith, that regarding that they categorize hadith as either being one, hadith al-maqbul, those hadith that are said to be acceptable, and that will divide into hadith al-sahih of its highest degree, and then the second degree is hadith al-hasan, and both are considered to be hadith maqbul, hadith that are acceptable. And as we mentioned, both those hadiths, category of hadith, a hadith can be used and acted upon, and also rules and regulation can be established upon them. Then he mentioned the third category of hadith, which is hadith al-da'if, which also agreed upon by ulama regarding hadith being, some hadith being said to be da'if. And as for the discussion regarding hadith al-da'if, is of those categories agreed upon that some hadith are said to be da'if. So not everything that is attributed to the Prophet ﷺ is said to be actually authentic and can be traced back to him correctly. So as for hadith al-da'if, as the first of the discussion regarding hadith al-da'if, that author rahimahullah, he defined hadith al-da'if as we mentioned, ma laysa wahidan minhuma. But as for a more detailed discussion regarding hadith da'if and its definition, that one, da'if, the ulama mentioned concerning the word da'if, it means concerning something which is marid or saqim. So da'if, it comes from meaning something is either something which is well, something is weak, something is unwell, that which is weak. So that's concerning, or ill, so that's concerning hadith da'if, linguistically. As for hadith da'if, as for what is mentioned by the ulama of hadith or defining hadith da'if, you have several definitions that is given regarding hadith da'if. Even you find the author rahimahullah himself, Ibn Malakin rahimahullah, in his book that he called Al-Muqna, that he discussed a summary of the book of Ibn Salah, Muqaddimat Ibn Salah, that he defined Hadith Da'if by stating in that book of Al-Muqna, his other book in Hadith, that have more detail, much more detail, that he discussed Hadith Da'if by stating that, he called Hadith Da'if by stating, Hadith in Al-Muqna by stating Ad-Da'if. Huwa kullu, so he mentioned the definition of Hadith, Huwa kullu حديث لم يجتمع فيه صفات الصحيح ولا حسن. So the author rahimahullah Ibn Malakin in his other book Al-Muqna fi Ulum al-Hadith, that he mentioned regarding the definition of Hadith Da'if by stating Da'if, huwa kullu hadithin, is every hadith, lam yajtama, that does not combine or gather, fihi, within it, sifat as-sahih, the description of or a condition of Hadith Sahih, wala Hasan, nor Hasan. So according to him, Hadith Sahih is every hadith, or Hadith Da'if, Hadith Da'if is every hadith that does not gather all the description or main the characteristics of Hadith Sahih, nor Hasan. So that's the way that he described or defined Hadith Ad-Da'if. You find Ibn Hajar rahimahullah kind of somewhat and I put another definition in his book An-Nuqat ala Ibn Salah, that he kind of somewhat he described the Hadith As-Sahih or Hadith Al-Da'if by stating Hadith Al-Da'if by stating كل حديث لم يجتمع فيه صفات المقبول or صفات الحديث المقبول. So Ibn Hajar rahimahullah kind of somewhat summarize that definition by mentioning Hadith Al-Da'if, that is every hadith that does not gather all the sifat, description or characteristics of Hadith al-Maqbul. So Maqbul will comprise of Hadith al-Sahih and also Hadith al-Hasan. So that's more of a more precise definition of Hadith al-Da'if by Ibn Hajar rahimahullah. Others also have described Hadith al-Da'if by giving another definition by stating that Hadith al-Da'if huwa Hadith, that Hadith al-Da'if, it is Hadith الذي فقد شرطا من شروط Hadith al-Maqbul. So that's another way of also expressing Hadith or defining Hadith al-Da'if, which is Hadith al-Da'if is that hadith that have missed one of or more of the conditions of Hadith al-Maqbul, of the hadith which is acceptable. So those are the definitions that are given concerning Hadith al-Da'if. Also, I have some others, but those are the main of the definition that are given or out there regarding Hadith al-Da'if. So Hadith al-Da'if is that hadith that does not that misses one or more of the conditions set in hadith that is considered to be maqbul. And of those things that to take into consideration, so from that definition, so hadith da'if, it has missed, forfeit one of the conditions or more of hadith maqbul. Or another way of saying it, that the hadith, it does not comprise or fulfill the criteria for hadith al-maqbul. It does not fulfill the criteria of hadith al-maqbul, which is hadith, we said a maqbul of hadith which is either considered to be sahih or hasan. So that's concerning hadith al-da'if. So as for those things regarding the concerning missing of those conditions, so with hadith al-da'if, then it is forfeiting one of the conditions of hadith al-maqbul. What are those conditions of maqbul? That if he forfeits, that one, ittisal. So if that hadith, that there's a breakage, so regarding hadith being maqbul, it's supposed to have a continuous chain where all the narrators are narrating upon each other. But if there's is a missing link amongst one of those of some of the narrators, then that's said to be adam al-ittisal. There's no ittisal, inqita'. There's a form of breakage. So if that condition is forfeited, it is missed, then the hadith is of a reason to all the hadith to be da'if. Or second, looking at the rawat regarding ad-dabt. So if the narrator is not said to be one who have that level of memory that's considered to be acceptable, to an acceptable standard or degree, where it is below what is acceptable, then that will forfeit one of the condition of the hadith being said to be maqbul, and then grade the hadith as that which is da'if, because it did not comply with a rule concerning acceptability or to a standard that is acceptable from the level of the person's a level of dabt, memorizing of the hadith. The third is regarding the adala. So looking at the adala of each of the narrators, if some of those narrators, one or more, that they did not fulfill that criteria of having proper adala, then that hadith is said to be daif. So of those things concerning adala, some of the persons are fasiq. Also of the person who is said to be discussed, that concerning of being a person of ahlul bidah, at what point does it negate the person's narrations? So those are of the thing, the person not having adala. Of another condition that also concerning faqd ash-shudhud. If the hadith does not, the hadith that is present, it does have shudhud. It is present. Then that will cause the hadith, grade the hadith to be daif, because of the condition it should not be present, which is shudhud, having that type of contradiction. Then if it is present, then the hadith is dismissed. Another condition, if the hadith is said to present this, is considered to be daif, which is the hadith having concerning illah al-qadiyah. So this type of illah, which is have a negative impact or effect upon the hadith, then it will dismiss the hadith from being maqbool and then class the hadith, grade the hadith to be daif. So those are the things that one has to, or the hadith is a level of concerning that weakness where it cannot strengthen another hadith, as we'll discuss soon after. So those are the conditions that if the hadith was to forfeit them, then they're said to be daif. It did not comply with a condition of acceptability. That of the matters regarding hadith ad-daif. Also regarding concerning hadith ad-daif, that of the masail that ulama discuss concerning hadith ad-daif, that it has tafawut. Hadith or maratib, it have degrees. So hadith ad-daif is not on one degree, one level. So even though a person, one of ulama of hadith may say hadithun daif. So that's a general ruling on hadith. But that same hadith may be of concern, the weakness in the hadith can be in cases severe and sometimes mild. So that's concerning. So hadith daif, it has maratib or as tafawut, maratib ad-daif. We have concerning that you have mild, you have that which is mutawassit, and also you have that which is severe. So you have different degrees concerning weakness in hadith. After ulama can somewhat but concerning daif al-yasir, which is a slight weakness in the hadith, where those hadith which concerning sayl hifz, the person somewhat is known to have sayl hifz, that is, if is somewhat a little bit weak, he has weakness in his memory, he forgets, sometimes he didn't, not that as precise. So a person that concerning da'f al-yasir, if in cases that it can be strengthened with another hadith that is similar to it. And then you have the second type, which are those hadith concerning the rank, the level, that hadith which concerning that dafahu shadid, that the weakness in the hadith, it is said to be very weak. So hadith which is very weak. Now, those hadiths of that level, where concerned a person might said to be matruk, a person who's completely dismissed, and we'll discuss those terminology more later. So the person said to be of that level concerning daf shadid, severe weakness, then that hadith in no way can it be strengthened, nor can it strengthen others. So the hadith is totally dismissed. So as we mentioned that, and that type of so hadith concerning maratib, one hadith at times may have more than one reason to all the hadith to be daif. So it could have concerning matter that relates to several reasons that have been highlighted in the isnad or in the method of the hadith that will be used against the hadith because due to those things being present. So the general thing, the hadith ad-daif, it have different degrees, different degrees. Some which is severe and others that are not. The most severe grading of hadith of being classed as weak, which is also said that is of the worst scenario in hadith, is hadith al-mawdu'. So hadith al-mawdu' has to be discussed, although hadith are said to be fabricated, that they are the worst kind of hadith. Well, as we'll discuss those later and explain more in detail. So hadith that are said to be mawdu' in general, that are hadith that are fabricated, then these hadith are the worst degree of hadith of weakness, regarding its weakness, that can be found. Then the next matter regarding hadith is regarding aqsam al-da'if. So regarding concerning, we mentioned that you have different levels of concerning of hadith ad-da'if. and they fall into different categories. So of those things that will be looked at regarding hadith da'if, that it could be various reasons, but the reason for the weakness in hadith, it will fall into either one, as some of the ulama have mentioned, that of the reason for hadith being said to be weak, that one, that there's a sabab of the reason, asbab, or of the reason for the hadith being classed as weak, that it could be concerning saqt or inqita, that there's a breakage in the isnad. So of the reason why hadith is considered to be weak or graded as weak, due to that there's an inqita or saqt, that there's a missing link in the isnad. So because of this inqita, there's a breakage in isnad or saqt, then this is of the reason to all the hadith to be da'if. It contradicts what is expected, which is that ittisal, which is, it is the hadith of a continuous chain of narrators, all receiving the hadith from the person before him. And those type of saqt in the isnad, or inqita fil isnad, then it could fall into hadith being said to be mu'allaqa, I will discuss later, mursal, munqata, mu'dal, and the likes. Also, the second reason behind the hadith being considered to be da'if is that concerning that, a second reason concern, atan for riwat, that there's an attack upon the narrators. So there's a jarh, some form of something that disparaging statements that is said about the narrators, the narrator, one or more narrator. So if there's some disparaging statements that is mentioned regarding a narrator, then that can remove that narrator's credibility, adala. So based upon this, the hadith is said to be weak due to some form of attack upon a particular narrator. So that goes against concerning having a certain level of adala. So if that is missing, then the hadith is said to be weak. So often concerning atan fil adala could be regarding concerning a person said to be a fasiq, or with some cases to discuss al-mubtada', a person said to be of al bidah, as these are said to be ta'an upon the narrator. Also, another reason, sabab, fi da'af al-hadith, another reason for stating the hadith, grading hadith as being weak, is that the ulama have mentioned concerning that fact, shart, dabt al-rawi. So the rawi, that was not very precise in narrating the hadith. So he has weakness in his memory. He has sayl-if, mughaffal. So those type of things regarding narrator being one, concerning that very mindful regarding his memory and preserving what he has memorized, then this can be of a reason why the hadith is said to be weak, due to weakness in his ability to retain the hadith. Also another reason concerning ad-daf fi adam, concerning shudhuz. So this type of illah, this type of criticism of the hadith regarding that, either concerning that there is shudhuz, that one is another, the narrator is contradicting someone or a group or others, then this type of contradiction, then it can cause the hadith to be dismissed. And those cases of shudhuz is from a person also, which I will discuss later, a person said to be, that is a person generally himself is said to be of a personal thiqah. But in certain cases, that person is thiqah, or somewhat credible, outstanding in his memory and his uprightness in his deen, that at times that he can make errors. So that will cause concern hadith to be said to be shadh, and that will, that being present, will dismiss the hadith, and it will be considered to be da'if. Also concern al-illah al-qadi'ah. You find that there's in the hadith some form of hidden defects that will make the hadith that which is dismissed, that will cause the hadith to be dismissed. So these are the reasons regarding concern. At time you have concerning muttarib and other reasons that nakara in the hadith and those type of things. So those are reasons regarding that will cause the hadith to be dismissed due to illatun qati'ah. There's hidden defects in the hadith that one have to consider, and if present, then the hadith will be dismissed. So those are the asbab regarding hadith being considered to be da'if. And hadith of da'if, they fall into many categories. some put over 60, some put it over 40 different categories of hadith da'if. So that's a discussion between the ulama, but there are many. So as we'll discuss that aqsam concerning anwa, what I refer to concerning anwa, hadith da'if, that there are many. So you have many forms of hadith that are said to be classed, where some of the ulama are giving specific names or mustalahat terminologies to different some types of hadith that are said to be weak. So by hearing that term, you understand the hadith is weak. So by hearing that terminology, then a person gets to understand that that particular hadith is said to be weak. So you have different terminologies that are used to express hadith being weak. So mursal, munqata, mu'dal, these are terms indicating shudhuz, hadithun shadh. So these are concerning mudraj, muttarib. These are wording indicating that, or terminology indicating that the hadith has some form of weakness, and the hadith is weak due to that particular factor. And also these terms that they have, will explain those terms in upcoming lesson. So the next matter regarding hadith ad-da'if. Hadith or da'if, so someone to bring things more closer to mind, that you have many hadith, you have different hadith on that matter. Amthila regarding hadith da'if, that the hadith that is mentioned as an example, the hadith an Mu'adh bin Jabal radhiyallahu anhu قال رأيت النبي عليه السلام إذا توضأ مسح وجهه بطرف ثوبه. Then the hadith of Mu'adh ibn Jabal radhiyallahu anhu, that he said that I saw the Prophet alayhi salam, يتوضأ, that he was alayhi salam tawadda, that he performed wudu, ومسح وجهه, and that he wiped his face with the parts of his thobe, with part of his thobe. So that hadith ulama mentioned that At-Timithi rahimahullah called isnadu da'if. So At-Timithi rahimahullah, that he mentioned, this hadith is narrated by At-Timithi himself, that he mentioned with the isnad, that hadith he mentioned, قال At-Timithi isnaduhu da'if. So At-Timithi rahimahullah, of those also who is the one who's the narrator, the one who compiled the hadith and is jama', that he himself also that ruled on this hadith that is something which is weak. So that's concerning, then he mentioned that of one of the narrators who's Rishdain, one of the narrators Rishdain ibn Sa'd wa Abdullah wa Abdul Rahman ibn Ziyad ibn An'am al-Afriki, that both are said to be weak individuals. So those two narrators, who's Rishdan and also Abdul Rahman, that both those two narrators are said to be weak. So they are present in the hadith, then we'll grade the hadith as being weak. Then also you have other hadith regarding concerning that particular matter. So you have other hadith, that's said an example, and of hadith being da'if. In the next lesson, that the intention, inshallah ta'ala, is to mention some example concerning hadith that are said to be sahih, examples of hadith that are said to be hasan, and also hadith which is da'if. So with more detail, or discussing a particular hadith and how it is looked upon by the ulama. So in the next lesson, we'll go to some form of amaliyah tatbiqiyya, some form of practical example regarding look at the hadith and the conclusion the ulama might come to based upon are those conditions of hadith sahih or maqbool present or not, and what's the rule that is befitting to that hadith. So in next lesson, we'll discuss, bring forth a practical example, binillah tabarak wa ta'ala. So as concerning hadith on this matter, then also you have, for example, another hadith that I mentioned concerning that say of other hadith, in the other lesson we'll bring other examples, but we mentioned that hadith da'if, it is something which is there in the books of hadith. So regarding concerning that another matter kind of somewhat to highlight regarding hadith da'if, that regarding concerning hukm upon a hadith, that we try also one, that to see what is said or what we can find or what is available regarding knowing the ruling on a hadith, the grading of hadith, by looking one to see what have been said by the ulama of hadith. First, that we see as to if there anything that have been mentioned by the ulama of old. So from the scholars of old who have discussed concerning hadith and grade them, and of those scholars of old we intend the likes concerning Imam Bukhari, was also Ahmad ibn Hanbal, Ibn Ma'in, and others who have looked at hadith and have graded them to see what they have said about certain hadiths. Then also, if not, then we also see what are also compare also what have been said by the ulama that came after them, and make a compare and see what's to what the ulama have said regarding hadith, and then try to come to a final conclusion if there's a difference between the ulama. So that's concerning that matter to be mindful. So we are very mindful concerning ilm hadith, like in all the science of Islam, that we should first be mindful concerning what have been mentioned by hadith by the ulama of old. If we have accessibility to this and it's available, we look to what they have said first, then we see as to what have been said after them. So that's concerning that matter. Then also another matter concerning ilm al-hadith, regarding hadith da'if in particular, that the ulama also mentioned concerning the more weaker ahadith. Isnad. So you have that discussion regarding trying to identify some of the more hadith that are said to be very, very weak and well known. So when these isnad are seen, then a person generally know what the grading to give to those hadiths. The next matter regarding hadith da'if, that more intense discussion regarding hukum amal bil hadith, concern that hadith da'if in general, as a general rule, that when they are narrated, so the next part is concerning hukum riwayat al-hadith da'if. Hukum riwayat hadith da'if. So regarding concerning hadith da'if, narrating these hadith. So in a general thing, that ulama mentioned that, the ulama mentioned concerning that a hadith da'if, because it's said to be hadith da'if, then we cannot attribute that hadith back to the Prophet ﷺ, because it's being said to be weak, not fulfilling the condition of acceptability. So when it is narrated, or when it is past that judgment on the hadith, then it is said to be something that we cannot fully claim to be report back to the Prophet ﷺ, or go back to the Prophet ﷺ. So the general thing, the hadith is said to be weak, then it is hadith that is said to be weak, then it is classed as we had mentioned, so not to be used per se. So those hadith are to be dismissed and not to be used as a form of passing of judgments. So with that discussion, it move on to the next discussion, which is so they discuss which it is concerned hukum al-hadith. So the hukum of acting upon hadith which is da'if. So one, when a person narrates hadith is da'if, then one should clarify this. So after thinking of the ulama of hadith, they mention a person use or mention hadith, whether in a form of a book or in a lecture or in a wa'adh, admonition, then it's upon the person that one should make it clear to the listener that the hadith is da'if, or the reader that this hadith is da'if. So if it is used, then the person should, normally procedures is that a person is expected to clarify this and mention hadith da'if. So the person is clear regarding the hukum on this hadith. So that's concerning of the matter. And also some of the ulama, they might mention that it can be narrated by which that the person mentioned the hadith bisigat tamrid, we can something that indicate the hadith is da'if. So mention ruya, and so mention the way indicating da'if, but not many people might know those terminologies in narrating hadith, which is indicating that it is weak. So some mention that one needs to clarify, or it is upon the person to clarify that the hadith is weak, who have mentioned that hadith. So this fall into the next matter, which is concerning hukum amal bil hadith da'if, the ruling and acting upon acting upon a hadith which is weak. The ulama have mentioned that this matter, that we'll mention the general thing that the ulama have aqwal on this matter, but it had been somewhat divided into three main groups regarding this matter. So 3 main opinion on this matter regarding one acting upon a hadith which is da'if, using hadith of da'if to act upon as a form of proof to some degree, or acting upon this. They mentioned that a difference between the ulama on this topic. The first opinion regarding acting upon hadith which is da'if is one allowed or not allowed. They mentioned the first opinion that Adam Jawaz al-amal bil hadith da'if. That the first opinion of the ulama is that one is not allowed to act upon hadith which is da'if. لا في أحكام ولا في العقائد ولا في الفضائل الأعمال. So they are all that the person is not allowed to act upon hadith da'if in regarding to matters regarding ahkam al-Islam, regarding halal and haram and ibad and of that nature. Second, hadith al-aqaid, matter relating to belief. And third, fadal al-amal. And the third, they also include virtuous actions. And the discussion really between the ulama is regarding this third group, this particular third area, regarding matters concerning fadal al-amal, virtuous action. Can we use hadith da'if in this particular area? So that's the crux of this matter. So as for hadith as for matters relating to ahkam, ash-shar'iyya, halal and haram, then majority hold that the person should not act but upon hadith which is maqbool. As for hadith da'if, then no. So the majority is of the view that regarding and close to consensus that hadith concerning aqaid, belief, and matters regarding the unseen, matters of the past or of things of the future, matter regarding things relating to ahkam, halal and haram, then those things must be established upon hadith which is maqbool, either sahih or hasan. As for hadith da'if, then no. So that's the overwhelming, that's the view that is established. But they differ in the area concerning hadith regarding fadal al-amal, virtuous deeds. So in a form of you want to encourage people to do certain type of virtuous actions, then can we use hadith da'if in that regards? So that's the area of discussion between the ulama. So the first view is, which is they hold concerning that hadith da'if is not to be used regarding any matter of Islam. That's the first opinion of those who this view have been attributed to them. They mentioned is the view that is said to be the view of Imam Muslim, rahimahullah. Also a view that is said to be of the view of Yahya ibn Ma'in. Also is the qawl of Abi Bakr ibn al-Arabi, al-Marifa, al-Maliki. Also is the view that is said the view of Ibn Hazm al-Zahiri. So those of the ulama who are of that view, and also of contemporary of the ulama who are of that view regarding that, not to use the impermissibility of using hadith da'if in any matters, including fadal al-amal, is not to be used in that regard, of the contemporary and Shaykh Al-Albani rahimahullah, who have written books or of that view. So that's concerning that, the first view. The second view regarding hadith da'af, regarding on this topic, on this matter, then a view concerning jawaz, al-amal bil hadith da'if. Those who all at the permissibility of acting upon hadith da'if. Whether this is relating to matters concerning ahkam or other than this. Ahkam or other than this. And they mention ma lam yakun da'afahu shadid. As long as the weakness is not one which is severe. So the hadith doesn't have severe weakness. They all that the person, this view is that one can act upon hadith da'if regarding ahkam and also matter regarding fadal al-amal. As long as there is nothing else available in that on that topic. If there's nothing else available with their condition, so their condition that shouldn't be severe weakness. Another condition of them, lam yakun yujad fi al-bab ghayru, that there's nothing else on that topic. وَلَمْ يَكُنْ, and there's nothing يُعَارِض, and there's nothing that contradicts this. So they have those three conditions regarding that view. And that's the view that is taken by Jumhur of the ulama. So Jumhur of the ulama, that they give permissibility of acting upon hadith which is da'if, but they lay certain condition, as we mentioned, that the hadith that shouldn't be severely weak. That also a second condition of them is that the hadith, there's nothing else, if there's nothing else but that hadith on that topic, and also where the person cannot find anything as a substitute that is authentic, and also that there's nothing else that contradicts or go in opposition to that hadith that is authentic. And I was mentioned that the view of the Jumhur of the ulama, minhum, they mention Imam Ahmed wa Abu Dawood as-Sijistani. So they have the view concerning the hadith. There's nothing else, then a person can use hadith to da'if. Ahmed rahimahullah, a famous Ahmed, that he preferred to use hadith to da'if over qiyas wa ara rijal. So Ahmed ibn Hanbal, of a thing that is known, that was said to be of his view, that he preferred to use hadith which is weak over that which is, as we mentioned, not severely weak, over that of qiyas, analogies, and also that of statements of men, people's opinion. So that's concerning that matter. Then we have a third view that that mentioned that they give a permissibility to use hadith ad-da'if, but in regards to fadal al-amal. So they can somewhat restrict it more in the area of fadal al-amal, virtuous actions. So the permissibility is that yes, you can use hadith da'if only in the area of fadal al-amal. As for things of aqidah and things of ahkam al-haram, then no, it's not to be done. So in the bab of tarhib or targhib, they mention it can be done except with aqahid and also ahkam shar'iyya. And that third view that restricted to fadal al-amal, they also have certain conditions. They mention one, and akuna da'afuhu la yakun da'afuhu shadid, that the weakness also should not be severe. And also this matter is said in yandarij tahta asl shari, that hadith that is being discussed, there's other hadith that can somewhat establish that fact in general. So you have other hadith that may already establish this. And also they mentioned that some of them also they put that the person should not, even though you act upon the hadith, not believe that hadith to be authentic. So the person not to say the hadith is authentic, nor a person to believe the hadith is authentic, but does it based upon these condition of fadal amal, where they mention that in that area one can be a bit more lenient. And acting upon it by bab, as said by al-ihtiyat, by kind of somewhat taking a safe way. So that's concerning the aqwal of the ulama on that topic. So that's concerning that discussion between the ulama regarding hadith da'if, acting upon it, that the area of the difference between the ulama really lies upon concerning hadith da'if regarding fadal al-amal. We mentioned that there's views among of the ulama, there's different views amongst the ulama of hadith and others on this particular topic, and we mentioned some of those views. We mentioned some of the views of the ulama regarding that particular topic. So the next of those matter to be discussed is concerning Madhan Hadith Da'if. What are the sources of the books that we can use as reference sources that one can refer back to or go back to regarding knowing Hadith Da'if? So we mentioned before that for Hadith Sahih, you have certain books that are considered to be primary references. Then for Hadith Hasan, not per se that we have specific book written on the topic of Hadith Hasan only. Then regarding Hadith Da'if, are there books written specifically outlining or gathering Hadith Da'if? On this particular matter, that some of the ulama have written hadith regarding books that they mention regarding that you find either books or written concerning that a particular type of hadith da'if, which is concerning that so you have books that are specific regarding some of the type of hadith da'if, which is, for example, mawdu', a hadith al-mawdu'. You have many books on gathering hadith al-mawdu'. Ibn Jawzi in his Kitab al-Mawdu'at, specifically that he gathered hadith in that book that are on the topic of hadith al-Mawdu'. Also you have Marasil. So Abu Dawood as-Sijistani that have a book concerning Marasil. So you have books specifically about hadith al-Mursal, Marasil. And also you have concerning al-Ilal, hadith concerning to know that Ilal, that is written by Ibn Abi Hatim, So you have books written on specific areas regarding hadith da'if. Then books that are specific on that topic, that in more general, you have a book that is referred to as Nawadir al-Usul, Nawadir al-Usul, that's written by Hakim At-Timithi. So Hakim At-Tirmidhi rahimahullah, that died the year 320, that he have a book that is called Nawadir al-Usul. The book is in print, that mainly is about hadith da'if. That is, many hadith da'if is mentioned in that particular book. Also a book that is called Musnad Firdaus by Daylami, that also mention many hadith which is da'if. And then you have more so of contemporaries that have written specifically concerning books or hadith which is da'if. Then also you have books of old concerning Du'afa al-Kabir that mention about riwayat, and also some of their narration that are da'if. So they mention about the narrator, but also give examples of some of his narrations that are weak. Also Kamil fil Du'afa li Ibn Adi. So these are books that mention about narrators, and also will include narrations that some of those narrators mentions that are weak. So you have those type of books that are there. Of contemporary times, you have some of the ulama kind of somewhat more delve into this area of those. Shaykh Albani rahimahullah, Muhammad Nasiruddin Albani rahimahullah, that of the muhaddith of this time, that he had written on this particular topic, where that you find that Shaykh Albani rahimahullah, that he has a book that's called As-Silsila Al-Da'ifa. So Silsila Al-Da'ifa, that mention mainly hadith which is da'if. So that book, he gathered hadith which is da'if and put it in Silsila Al-Da'if, and also Silsila Al-Sahiha, hadith which is authentic according to the judgment of the Shaykh rahimahullah. So you have those type of book. Also he has, like for example, Shaykh Albani, that you have checked the book of As-Sunan Al-Arba, Abu Dawud, Tirmidhi, Ibn Majah, An-Nisa'i, and you can somewhat divided those books into, for example, Sunan Abi Dawud or Da'if, Sunan Abi Dawud, wa Da'if, Sunan Abi Dawud. So you can somewhat separate the book into two parts. One part is Sahih, and one part which is Da'if. Also, so you have with several books, Sunan also, for example, Adab al-Mufrad by Imam Bukhari rahimahullah. So you can somewhat took that approach. So those are some of the books that are written regarding hadith ad-da'if, and you have others who have written on that topic. So that inshallah ta'ala, that's concerning this particular lesson for today, relating to hadith ad-da'if. So we mentioned concerning the definition of hadith ad-da'if, and also example, and also books in that particular area. So that's concerning. So we end there for today inshallah ta'ala, and we'll see the next lesson, bi'awnillahi subhanahu wa ta'ala, bi'idhnillahi subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we'll try to do of bring either one hadith and study it, or bring a particular book and see how different of the ulama, how they may look at the hadith from different angles and sometimes come to different conclusion. And why is this? So inshallah ta'ala, we'll do that. That will be the next lesson. So to give some practicality to what we have so far covered. وبالله تعالى توفيق وهذه السبيل والآخر دعوانا الحمد لله. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.